Welcome, I'm Michael Bickert. Thanks for joining me today as we explore concepts with the objective of improving your management skills and growing your business. Grab a notepad and a pen because I want you to take notes. I want you to make a commitment that you will jot down at least one action item that you can implement in your business today, because that's what this is all about, implementation to drive your business forward. Today we're going to continue our discussion in the playlist of waste and how you can become more effective as a manager by minimizing the amount of waste, or Muda as the Japanese call it. And today we're looking at overprocessing. And maybe this means something different than you think it does. If you don't actually understand the basic premise of waste and Muda as it relates to, or as it was originally defined by Toyota in their Toyota production system and the Toyota way, you may want to visit one of our original 2 videos in which we discuss that. But it's okay, these are in no particular chronological order, and maybe the context of how we present the material today will help you to understand the overall concept. But we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into overprocessing, and this is the penultimate form of waste in our first 7, but there's actually an 8th video, sort of a bonus, that is another form of waste as well. So let's get into it. Once again, I'm going to put up on the screen some notes, and so the notes that you're taking are, as usual, meant to be your own thoughts as this relates to your business and how you can apply this to minimize or attempt to work toward the elimination of various forms of waste in your business, in your production methods. So use that opportunity to pause the video and jot down things as you think of them in the context of your business. So I'll give you some premises to consider, and then we'll look at some categories and examples. So let me bring that up on the screen. And by the way, I will put this link in the description so that you can download those notes. So if you want to reference this back later, maybe you want to replay the video, or as you're going through this, as your homework assignment to yourself, you have a little exercise where you're going to go through the little bullet points that I have here and try to apply each of those in your business, and you're going to try to think of examples that you can look for and explore in your business. Don't worry, you can download the notes. All you'll have to do is click on the link in the description and then enter a name and email address, and we'll send that out to you via PDF, absolutely free. All right, let's pull the notes up on the screen here. Okay, so as mentioned, today we're discussing overprocessing. And overprocessing you can think of as synonymous with the word unnecessary. Anytime that you are adding something to your process, to your production method, and remember this goes for both products and services. So as I'm using examples and I'm talking in terms of a product, just apply it in your mind to the service. But anytime you're adding something to your production methods, to the way that you produce those products or services that you offer your customers, your market, and it does not add perceptible value to your market, that is what overprocessing is. So I want you to bear in mind the following premises as we go through this concept. First of all, invested resources must add value. So every time you are investing a resource in your business, it's got to add value. And I'm talking about value to your customers. Value to any stakeholder, I suppose you could expand that definition, but you must add value. Anytime you are investing resources and you are not adding value, you're wasting resources. And what we're trying to do is minimize waste. The second one is eliminate the unnecessary. So think of in terms of everything, every constituent, every component, every part, everything you do. Is it necessary? Ask yourself, is this absolutely necessary? If the answer is no, this isn't necessary, then why are you including it? You need to eliminate the unnecessary. The next one is the best component or process step is no component or process step. And that's just kind of another way to think of the previous statement. If it's not necessary, we want to eliminate it. And ideally, we wouldn't need a process step or we wouldn't need a component. Things would happen automatically. And that maybe sound a little abstract, but think about, say, music. Back in the 80s, the greatest generation for music, by the way, you were playing music on cassettes, and toward the late 80s, you would find CDs. But what has happened over time is the medium by which you consume music has changed to where in the 80s, you couldn't even conceive of the notion of an MP3 or digital music that just streams. It's like it comes through a device out of the air. Back then it would be like, oh, well, I want to improve, I want to innovate to go from a cassette to a CD. You couldn't conceive of the notion that there would be no component. You wouldn't need a component whatsoever in terms of a device that stores the music on it. Well, our definitions of that device have completely been reshapen. And so think of that in terms of your product and service, is that you're always trying to go into a direction where you're able to eliminate those things which become unnecessary due to technological advances, and you're the person creating those technological advances. That is, you are coming up with better ways, you are innovating your product or service to eliminate things, and when you do that and your competition doesn't, you end up with a better product. You end up with a better iteration, a better version. All right, the next one is apply the minimum effective dose. So that's a concept, I think, borrowed from the pharmaceutical industry or the healthcare industry, medicine, and that is you want to apply the minimum effective dose. So if you were taking a medicine, we have this attitude in our society that if something is good, more is therefore better, and that's certainly not true. You can understand that in terms of medicine. You could overdose, you can take too much of something just because you're taking a particular prescription or over-the-counter medication and it's helping to remedy a symptom. If you take too much, it can actually have you can have an adverse reaction, it can have adverse effects on you. And so what do you want to do? How much should I take? How much should I apply? The minimum effective dose, the absolute minimum that I can take or apply, and it still works. And that's what you want to think of in terms of the elimination of overprocessing, is what is the minimum resource that I can apply here, and it's still effective. It doesn't diminish value. Number 5, the inclusion of some things can actually detract from value. So we've said, not only do sometimes you add things into your production methods that don't actually have a perceptible value for your customer, sometimes it can actually result in diminishing the value, and that's absolutely terrible. Now you're investing your resources to actually diminish the value, and that of course would be unintended, but it happens from time to time, and we'll maybe have some examples of that occurring as we go through the examples page. But think about that, is that the inclusion of some things doesn't just fail to add value, it can actually detract from value. And then number 6, only reliable data can identify overprocessing. And you know what I'm all about, measurement. You've got to measure, and you have to rely on the data that you're getting. And if you can't rely on your data, that's data in and of itself. It means you need to go more granular. You need to take more precise measurements. And so think about that. It's like, as we go through this, you're going to realize it's like, the dose makes the cure, so to speak. And it's like, well, how much of this particular example do I need? Like Michael's giving an example here, and he's saying that is actual overprocessing, but in my business, I don't think so. I think that actually adds value. Well, of course, you need to determine that, and how are you going to determine that? By the data, getting market feedback, getting customer feedback. Are your customers saying to you, yes, we actually appreciate the value of this particular step, of this particular quality component that you're adding? Or does the data suggest you are unnecessarily adding things and you're not getting a return on that investment? All right, so those are the premises that we're going to operate going forward for overprocessing. Now let's look at some categories and examples. And as we go through this, I want to remind you that it's not just for products, it's not just for services, it's for both. You need to look in your business and apply these. I'm going to give some outlandish examples to make an extreme point, to try to make the case. I don't want you to dismiss that and say, oh, well, that's nothing to do with our business or whatever. I want you to think in your business if you have something that you can come up with as an example of each of these categories. So first up, I've got production-based. So when you are producing or manufacturing, creating your product or service, and that I've got here as the addition of materials, components, parts, or ingredients with imperceptible or even adverse effects. And here are some examples. So flavor, maybe you're in some sort of comestibles business and you're making food or processing food in some way. And you're adding something, an ingredient that doesn't really have a perceptible value in terms of flavor. So I've got up here as an example, floral notes. Now that, you may actually add floral notes to a particular icing of a cupcake or something like that, and your customers love it. Okay, well then dismiss my example and come up for examples in yours. Are there ingredients you're adding and they aren't actually changing the flavor in any perceivable way? Durability. So we want our products, of course, to be durable, but are we overdoing it? Are we over-processing in the name of durability? Bulletproof glass. I think of the launch of the Tesla Cybertruck, and they were trying to demonstrate, they have that notoriously, that famous example where the guy throws the big shot put massive ball bearing and actually cracks the window. But they were claiming that the glass was so very, maybe bulletproof. And, that might be great if you are selling a vehicle to, as the Pope Mobile, or if you're going to sell something that the president's being driven around in or something like that. But is it really necessary in terms of the production of what you're trying to accomplish here? Safety. We want safety in our products and services, of course, but are you marketing something that withstands earthquakes and you're in Alberta where we don't get earthquakes? Are you in a market that, have you added something in the name of safety that is really overdoing it, over-processing? Comfort. The example I put up here is 3-inch foaming. Well, would 2 inches of foaming work, of foam padding worked? When you're adding 3 inches and your customers can't even perceive the difference from 2 inches to 3 inches, or you're putting padding in some area that's underneath their feet and they're actually wearing shoes in this area and they're unable to perceive the difference between whether you add that padding or not. Also, I've got prestige and I've got Swarovski crystal on here. I don't know why I found that hard to say, but it's like, okay, maybe your product requires adding crystal for whatever reason, but does it need to be some really high-end name brand for the sake of prestige that your customers really don't care about? It's like, well, we needed crystal to serve this particular function or this particular look here. And if the only time they care is by, you have to tell them that that's Swarovski crystal. If you have to tell them each time, then that's probably an indication that it's not adding value. Or if the person who buys it, then every time they are showing off their product to somebody else and they have to mention that this particular piece of crystal in there is a name brand, it's from Tiffany or whatever, then that's probably over-processing. Also, effectiveness. So if you're adding something in the name of making your product or service more effective and it's not really doing anything, then that's over-processing. So I think of rhino horn as an extreme example. That there are some parts of the world where people insist on rhino horn, and unfortunately there's lots of poaching that goes on where people are killing the rhinoceros in order to get its horn, and then they're putting this in medicines, and it's completely ineffective. I mean, essentially the rhino horn is made out of the same collagen material that, say, your fingernails may be made out of, and it doesn't really have any medicinal purposes that have been effectively demonstrated in science. So, adding some kind of material or component to your product or service in the name of effectiveness, but you don't have any real research or data to support that it's adding to the effectiveness. That's overprocessing. What about compatibility? The example I have here is a disk drive. It's like, well, I created this particular hardware and I included a disk drive, and that's good, isn't it? Well, a disk drive certainly makes it more compatible, but maybe not for most of your customers. Maybe most of your customers don't use a floppy disk or even a regular DVD-ROM or anything like that these days. It's sort of antiquated. So the backwards compatibility that you may create in your product or service to make sure that you are adding more value, does it really add value, or is it just a sunken expense that you're not getting a return on that investment? Overprocessing. Functionality. So we're adding things to our product or service in the name of making it more functional, but is it really more functional, and do your customers care about it? Or is it one of these things, again, where it's not really perceivable by most of your market? So I've got here good to 30 meters. Well, if you're selling a smartwatch or a smartphone or some kind of digital device, and it can handle the pressure and it's watertight to 30 meters, and it's not the preferred choice of scuba divers and free divers, then what are you doing? Again, these are extreme examples. I don't want you to write this off. Instead, when you're doing your exercise, go through this and ask yourself, what am I doing in the name of functionality? What am I doing to make my product or service more functional for my customers? And is this perceptible by my customer? Do they actually believe in the value of this? If not, that's overprocessing. And go through this. Don't write off my examples as being a little bit ridiculous, because I'm doing that to demonstrate a point. All right, let's move on. Another category is process-based. So the difference being the production is more about the component, the constituent materials that go into something, and now the process is what you go through to actually deliver your product or service. Or so in the case of your product, it may be manufacturing your product, and came up in terms of your service, it's to be able to deliver your service, to render your service, to administer your service. So if you're in healthcare or if you're a tradesperson, something like that, it still applies. So I've got here inclusion of superfluous steps. Remember, the best step is no step. Eliminate the step entirely if it doesn't really add value. So I've got here an example of what I call hurry up and wait. So maybe again in the food industry, in order to produce a particular recipe, you heat something up, but to go to the next step, you need it to cool off, and so you apply some sort of rapid cooling step. And I've done this in cooking, not in business, but in personal life. Add it to an ice bath or put it in the freezer or something like that, only to realize later that my production method, I wasn't ready. I could have just allowed it to cool at regular speed, and by the time I was ready for the step where I needed that next component, it was cooled off already on its own. So think about this, and you could say, well, hey, just a second here. If you needed that, wouldn't that be waiting? If you needed the cooled component to move on and you now have to wait, that's another form of waste? Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of integration between kinds of waste, so you have to apply this in your context, your product or service, your processes, and find out whether or not it meets the definition in your case. Because there are forms of waste that are necessary. If the elimination of a particular waste or the minimizing of that waste involves the investment of more resources than it saves, then that's wasteful. That's known as necessary investment. That waste is now a necessary investment, and even though it might meet the strict definition of waste, it now is sort of excluded, and it's not the kind we would eliminate. So think about these things. I hope that made sense to you. I can elaborate on that another time. Equipment and tools. So I've got here as an example the Supermatic Widget Master 5000. If you're making widgets and the regular Matic Widget Master 2000 is all you need for your operation, then if you are investing major in more capacity that is unnecessary for a long time, for example, you have no data to support that would be necessary and give return on your investment, it is wasteful. So make sure that you're not using overkill in terms of equipment or tools. You know, you're not using a sledgehammer to pound in a tiny little nail. These types of things. That's, again, an extreme example, but look at the equipment and tools you use, and if you're considering investment in new equipment and tools, are they justified at this moment? You know, you might think, well, actually 2 years from now, I really do need the Supermatic Widget Master 5000. But 2 years from now, it might be the 6,000 at the 5,000 price, or the 5,000 might have reduced by half in price, something like that. So give some consideration to how you're making those investments so that you're not engaged in overprocessing and using equipment or tools that far surpass what would be, you know, adequate to get the job done is overprocessing. I've got here unproven. So if you're introducing a step that is unproven to be effective in any way to add value, then that is overprocessing. I've got reciting the ritual, you know, waving your hands and reciting some magic words over something. I'm intentionally giving a silly example, but I know there are things like this that go on where people are doing things that they believe maybe superstitiously or something like that, that add value, but their customers aren't willing to pay for that value. Now, if your customers are superstitious and it's important to your customers, that's different. It's not overprocessing now. If it's important to your customers that you say the magic words or whatever, then fair enough, you need to do that. But if it's internally, you think of this as necessary, or that it would, or even you think your customers would appreciate it, and they don't really. If the data doesn't support it, it is overprocessing. The next one I have here is experience-based overprocessing. Unnoticed or infrequently used luxuries. An example I have is a waiting room at a business that I attended had a massage chair, and I noticed as often as I went there that it was very infrequently used. People didn't use it that often, and when they did, it was free, and it was there for you to minimize the inconvenience of waiting, but they didn't have that much waiting there. And when you were waiting, it was only for a few minutes, and it's like, do you really enjoy a massage? I never used the thing once. Plus, I kind of thought, you know, I don't know how often they clean that thing. I don't really want to get into that massage chair. But the example I have here is if it's unnoticed or infrequently used. And are you including niceties in order to give a better customer experience? That adds value. We know that is one of the 4 constituents of value, customer experience. And so make sure when you're investing resources to improve your customer experience that they actually notice it, appreciate it, and use it. So measure that. The next one I have here is team-based overprocessing, which is excessive talent or skill acquisition and development. And the example I've got here is a rocket scientist on the fryer. He's cooking the fries, and he's graduated from MIT. Well, that would be excessive talent. You wouldn't want to go out and acquire that skill. And I use that example because I have observed where people often want to extract value from an organization based on what they believe to be intrinsic value in themselves, based on their previous experience, expertise, or knowledge. And that's great if it's applicable in this environment. But the rocket scientist who graduated from MIT is probably not using his computer science skills. He's probably not using his advanced mathematics or physics skills in operating being the fry cook, so to speak. So it has to, you want to make sure that you don't overhire. When you want to get the best team members possible, but there is such a thing as acquiring talent that is beyond what you need, the overqualified, and that can be overprocessing in terms of investing resources that do not add value to your final customer, to your main stakeholder. I've got another one here is hourly training. So I was involved in some major construction work many years ago, and I was a safety instructor and I had to do daily safety trainings. I can tell you, the guy is more or less tuned out. You know, I tried to do things, give away prizes and keep them, you know, tried to make it more exciting, but it was a central authority who assigned the necessity of that meeting. And the guys were like, we've heard this, we had to have it every morning. It was like, we've heard this time and again. Can you tell us to wear our safety glasses any more times? I mean, really, do you need to remind us that steel-toed boots are necessary on the right of way, and that we have to wear our hard hats and to be careful out there? It's really, again, that is a team-based over-processing. It's not adding any value to the final customer. Next one I have here is frequency-based over-processing. So if you're repeating steps too often, or there's redundancy, you're doing the same step. So the first one would be, my example I've got, like clean after every use. Now you might say, well, in my business, we have to clean, you know, you're making sausages and you got to clean the meat grinder after every use. Okay, fair enough. But some businesses are using tools and equipment, you know, like a hammer, that we do believe in 5S, and we want to keep everything, we want to shine, we want to keep things clean, our work area clean. There's benefits, but there's such a thing as over-processing when it comes to an example of the frequency of cleaning something. It's like, well, maybe this needs to be cleaned once a month, or this needs to be cleaned every day at the end of every shift, but does it need to be cleaned after every use? And I'm seeing that right now in the world right now. People are afraid of certain contaminants, and so they're cleaning like crazy, and that may be over-processing in the context of certain businesses, products, and services. The other one there that I have is redundancy, and that is if you can do the step once during the production, and that's enough, and it gives the same result as doing it 2 or 3 times. You want to eliminate redundancy. I see this with data entry, for example, where people fail to use integrations, so they have over-processing because they have a redundant step. It's not necessary to enter your customer's information into the system in 4 different areas. And I've seen this in healthcare offices or with legal or accounting firms that, you know, there's sort of patient intake forms and there's new client forms that you fill out, and I get annoyed when they're asking, when a business is asking me for the same information 3 times. It's like, I've already given you this information. I was, well, that was a different department, you know, that's our service department, this is being entered in sales. Think of this in your organization. Do you have redundancy in terms of steps? So frequency-based over-processing, it's not adding, and in this case, in my examples, can be detracting from value. Another one is time-based over-processing, excessive engagement in procedural components. So the example I put on here is stirring for 5 minutes. It's like, well, you know, again, I'm using a recipe, a food example. Maybe you're stirring something for 5 minutes, or it could be, you know, maybe it's a cement mixture that you're stirring for 5 minutes. It's like, well, is that the most precise way that you could define that? Or is it like, well, stir until the lumps are gone? And one person might do that in 1 minute, another person might be doing it for 5 minutes, and it's like, well, that's really over-processing. It didn't actually make it any smoother. Once the sugar is dissolved, you can stop stirring, and one person takes 5 minutes, another guy can do that in 1 minute, and it's like, do not over-process. So that's the time-based. Next category is marketing-based, and I've got here that it inputs or you have inputs yielding little to no output. So the first example I have on there is the pursuit of minuscule segments. So in my example of the, you know, your product might be good to 30 meters, you know, underwater. And it's like, well, I want to make sure that, because I want to make sure that if somebody wants to buy my product and they are a scuba diver or a free diver, that they can buy my product as well. In that case, you can see, obviously, what you would want to do is create a side project. You'd have a different product that's geared for them. Are you trying so hard and so desperately to include all the segments of the market that you are over-processing? And when you really look at the data, is it, well, boy, you know, the Pareto principle, 80% of our customers are using, or 20% of our customers make up 80% of our sales, and that none of those 20% are actually care about this, or is it like 99% of your customers? Forget the stats. I'm not giving good examples here. When I threw in the Pareto principle, I'm trying to redefine that, but you get the idea. What I'm saying here is don't pursue a minuscule segment of the market if it doesn't make sense. If that's your niche and that's what you're going for, then by all means, it's not overprocessing anymore to make sure that you add value to those people who appreciate it. That's long tail marketing. That's very good. But some of you are trying to be all things to all people, and that doesn't work, and that's overprocessing. The next one is endorsements. There's a time and a place for endorsements, celebrity endorsements. But if we're being honest with ourselves, you can think of, some product or service that you have engaged in, that you have parted with your hard-earned money to acquire, and it had a celebrity endorsement. Did that celebrity endorsement add any value to you? It might have been what convinced you, probably not, but it caught your attention. And so to the extent that it does catch people's attention and it adds some favorable mechanism to the brand, some value to the brand, then I'm okay with that. But oftentimes an endorsement can be, superfluous. It doesn't add any value whatsoever to people, and your data needs to support that. Are your sales going up because of investment you have in a particular endorsement, or are they not? In which case, you want to not waste. That's overprocessing. You don't want to waste those resources. Next one I have there is virtue signaling, and we see all sorts of that going on right now. So I saw in this woke culture, in this cancel culture, you got to be careful. If I give you two specific examples of virtue signaling that's going on in society, then all of a sudden I'm signaled out as someone who doesn't care. What a virtue signal is for the sake of making giving the illusion, the appearance that I care about a particular group of people or a cause of some sort. I'm going to advertise that. I'm going to put that slogan on my website or on the side of my delivery truck, as I saw recently, or whatever. And it's like, does that add any value to the customer? Like, is my delivery on time and organized? Did I get it? Was it clean and not damaged or whatever? Or was the slogan they put on the side of their delivery van meant to me go, wow, okay, well, they're woke and they really care about these things, so I should use that company. That is not adding value, and therefore it is overprocessing. You should never engage in virtue signaling. Exaggerated or misleading claims. Transparency. The truth is good enough, and it is overprocessing for you to exaggerate and to lack transparency with your market, to make some misleading claim. Certainly, by definition, it doesn't add value. You may actually, it may fall under the category of overpromising, and you may actually increase sales for a while, and you might be tricked into thinking that's a good thing. And we've seen this. Many products out there are claiming to be able to do things that they're not proven to be able to do, and it's exaggerated, this cures cancer or whatever, and it's overprocessing. You should never engage in any misleading or exaggerated claims about your product, because that's a waste of resources. You're spending resources to be able to communicate through marketing channels to your customers. Communicate honestly. Long term, you'll get the better return on that investment. Overly aggressive. So we talked about where the concept of overprocessing, not only can it fail to add value, but can actually detract from value. My previous example there of exaggerated or misleading claims, once people start to figure out that you exaggerated or misled them, then that detracts from your brand and from the value of your product. Being overly aggressive in your marketing, and maybe you're just really bombarding your people with marketing messages, it can backfire. We've all had that jingle stuck in our head, which is like, it drives me nuts. I will never buy that product or service because these guys, they're on, or your favorite program or your YouTube video was interrupted time and again by the same marketing message, and you just got fed up with it, and it actually backfired. It detracted from value. There's got to be a balance there. A lot of over-processing comes down to balance. That's what Muda is all about, is sometimes it's wasteful, other times it's not. You have to take a look at your business in the context. Are you being overly aggressive in following up with your customers where they're getting annoyed and now you're being way too assertive? Outdated value. What I'm referring to here is when in your marketing messages, you are trying to communicate to people based on a benefit of your product that is on outdated values. Like, people don't care about that anymore. It's like, I don't know. There are trends, and what people are really caring about in the market. Here's one, like low fat. Low fat is kind of being an antiquated concept. We now know that the low fat paradigm was highly misguided, and so there aren't that many products that rely heavily on the low fat. But if you're in the grocery store and you see a marketing message on the package that's like super low in fat, you can see that I would call that over-processing, unless they are specifically looking for a segment of the market that's still misled into believing that that works. There are outdated values that have sort of been dispelled, or they remain unproven and people don't buy into them anymore. And so if you are going to invest resources in marketing to communicate a message to your customers based on something that is antiquated or outdated, a concept that no one cares in anymore, that's over-processing. The next one I have up here is communication based. So that which goes without saying, and the examples I have here are work hard and good luck. I gave you the example of my safety meetings, and communication can be a form of over-processing in your products or services, in your production methods, when you are using words when no words are necessary. So, you might say, well, hey, it's nice to say good luck to someone. Yes, I said there is a balance, and if you're not nice to your people, then that's not a good thing. You want to make sure you're nice to your customers, you want to make sure that you're nice to your team members, but just superfluous language, throwing in things, platitudes and everything. There's another way to do that. You can be more effective and add value by making sure that you're very deliberate about your communication style. If you're trying to increase safety for your people, you don't just say, okay, be safe out there. You want to take measurements and communicate in such a way that's measurably very effective at improving the safety statistics. Whereas, just blurting things out unnecessarily, saying those things which go without saying. You want me to work hard? Yeah, okay, I know that. Thanks, boss. Whatever the case may be. So communication can be also a form of over-processing. Okay, so lots of examples for you to look into your business. Over-processing is one that I think really gets not overused, it gets overlooked by people in terms of waste. We don't think of anything as being that we add. If we've taken the time and we've deliberately added a step or a component to our product or service, we tend to believe that it adds value. But do you have the data to back that up? What does the data say? If your customers are not willing, they don't perceive more value by something, you need to eliminate it. You need to get it out of there because it's over-processing. You are dedicating resource and it affects your pricing. Your costs go up as a result of over-processing. And when your costs go up, either your margins have to shrink or your price has to go up. And since pricing is one of the 4 constituents of value, you are actually diminishing your value by having a higher price in the marketplace. And when your competitors are able to eliminate over-processing, their costs go down and they can compete against you far more aggressively. And that's a bad thing. So you want to be the person that's doing that. I think that's where I want to leave it today. We went on to a long time about this, and I hope you got something out of this. Make sure you do your homework assignment and figure out how this is applicable to your business, to your product or service, and then go ahead and leave some comment. Leave a comment that gives us an example that you came up with. And there's by no means a comprehensive list that I gave here. There are other types or other categories. There's certainly way more examples in the variety of businesses out there. And you put anything like that in there, and then when the community reads your comments, we all learn, and we need to learn from one another. Perpetual refinement.